I have the question for Jens, that during the talk given at SYNAPSE, the artist Agnes Meyer-Bandit, she has mentioned that by going between art and science, particularly biology, she can kind of like extend the human senses to reach the remote reality. And I think this term of remote reality is quite crucial, that it changing the understanding of aesthetics in terms of practicing and perceiving art, when art becomes like a kind of synchronizing set of biosemiotics. So I'm curious that how can curator as the exhibition maker can go beyond the representative quality of the art and the artwork, as you mentioned, the kind of like metaphysics level of the art and biology. How can they go beyond that representation to convey the full biosemiotics within the artistic context, which is still the aesthetics context? Yeah.
The question is, as I understand it, what is the specific possibility of conveying a feeling of this remote reality, while the artistic procedure and process is in fact multi-scaled. It involves, in Agnes Meyer-Bandit's works, the work with the real geese, raising them, imprinting them, carrying out actions, teaching them, building subchapters and linking them in a kind of meta-narrative network. And of course, on the first side, this of course deals and implies living organisms for which the artist has to take over responsibility. There is a lifelong commitment to these geese because they can outlive the artist. So it's really a project that, in the terms of scale, in terms of geographical, physical, and on temporal scale, is exploding the notion of what we consider usually as art. That means the condensation, the mesoscopic condensation, as an experiential space that people can encounter in an exhibition, for example. So very often I think that in biotechnological artworks, which very often are small, the very affect, the presence affect that one can feel as a human observer, observing another living system, in fact goes back to a very crucial relationship that Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela has described as the situation of a second order observation. That means I am a human being, and as a human being I'm looking at the living system, and this living system is very similar to me as an observer, who I am also a living system. So one living system is looking at another one, and therefore I can experience what I call a co-corporal presence, a co-corporal relationship. So this is something I think that very often biotechnological art has as a potential, but in the case of Agnes, of course, this is more complicated because yeah, you won't visit the geese at this Pollinaria farm. You have glimpses, you have excerpts, and you have a kind of exploded artworks that splits up into documentary and fetishized remains, which reminds us very much of how performance art worked. You know, you had the images of the performance, maybe some remains, some fetishized remains that you collect, you have photographies, but you haven't been at the very moment of the action. You know? So it's again asking the question whether the image, be it a document or being even a representation, is strong enough to convey this feeling that I'm really acknowledging the living as a living and not as something that is just reduced to the status of an aesthetic object. When it comes to biosemiotics, then I think that it's very interesting that while seeing the anthropomorphized geese as astronauts, as the very agents of their own destiny in relation to the human in an interspecies relationship, that indeed it provides a kind of mirror of thinking out of the box and thinking yourself out of this human-centered cosmos, where the Anthropocene is the result of an anthropocentric action. And maybe biosemiotics, which is another topic that I address, is a way out when we think of that biosemiotics considers all elements in the living cosmos as equal. It's a very tiny scale of a microscopic intervention. That means cell communication, bacterial communication, on our scale of individual action, of talk, but also on the psychosocial level as populations. So there is nothing that can be excluded, and humans do not stand out. We are just another producer of biological science in the semiocosmos. And I like this because also it shifts, like biosemiotics does, the center of attention from information to interpretation. All the discourse in biology in the last years was very much about information theory, which is close to cybernetics. And at the scale of the molecular intervention, we always talk about information theory. The gene informs the cell and so on. And the biosemiotics approach things the other way around. It doesn't matter so much how they inform. What is important is that something is being read and understood. And making sense in the terms of semiosis, this way it just simply means it lives. And only when it's rightly interpreted, then it can be living. So I like this approach of biosemiotics, and I think Agnes' works in a certain way does deal with it, because it shifts totally the focus of attention to a kind of initiator, which often is technologically defined as the human one, to a passive material of the outside ecology on which we imprint our actions, and to make us all equal in the light of biosemiotics.